way better role. Way better. Like, love it. I'm like,
Ready?
okay. This is Haley. And this is Bailey. You're listening to Unleashed.
So it's like 80 degrees outside, and I'm under a blanket right now. You love that? It's like
I
even
love
hotter
that.
than that, actually. It's like 85.
It's actually cold where I am right now, and I feel like I wish I was under a blanket. I'm sitting on top of my blanket, so probably could have planned a little better for that one.
I know, but like this topic of vulnerability we're going to talk about today, I was like, I feel like I need a weighted blanket or something. It's not weighted, but I'm like, it's just like that protection layer because I'm like, being vulnerable is scary. So having a blanket just makes me feel safe.
I agree. It is scary. I have Hudson right here. You can probably hear him snoring. Maybe not. We'll see. But he's laying on my feet, so maybe he's my weighted puppy.
Your weighted puppy. Olive's next to me, but she is hot. She's like, I like the cold leather. I am not going to lay on anything.
That is one of my favorite things. I definitely get cold super easy, but one of my favorite things about the cold is how snuggly Hudson is. Like, he just wants to be as close as he can, and I love that. Because when it's hot, he's like, please get away from me.
He's like, don't touch me. Yeah, totally. I'm usually a hot box to other people, but I'm always cold, which is weird.
Okay, let's just jump into today's topic, which we are talking about vulnerability. And the first question I have for you, Haley, is, and our audience, you can leave a comment below if you have a word for this, but what is one word you would use to describe vulnerability?
Only one word to describe
Only
vulnerability. Well, two come to mind. I guess so. The first one that comes to my mind, the first one was connection. Because with vulnerability can come connection. But the other word I was thinking, I know you said one, but I'm a rule breaker, was courage.
Okay, I like both of those. Those are really, this is a fun one. I feel like if you're listening to this, leave a comment below because I think everyone's going to look at it so differently. And I really like those because I feel like right when I thought of this, I thought scary. So that was like where my mind went. But it's cool to hear. And I definitely want to dive into why you picked those two words. I think both of those have two probably different meanings. And I think I have an idea. But let's chat about that. What do the two words mean to you and why did you pick those?
I think just like for the word connection that I picked, there's lots of layers to it, but vulnerability is essentially like a gateway to profound connection, and it invites us to discover and dig down to a level of depth that we are scared to embrace. And
so
when
scary.
we kind of and when we kind of allow ourselves to get to that level of authenticity, it allows us for like growth and to be able to become these people and form these connections that you probably wouldn't be able to unless you were vulnerable. And that takes courage.
That's super true.
I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think with that, like for something, at least with our friendship, I think a lot of, it obviously took a lot of time to get to where we are and, vulnerability and all that. And, we were talking about this right before we jumped on the podcast. We were talking as we were getting set up and we were like, we don't think you should be vulnerable always with everybody, but there's different layers. And I think there's two different ways because like for us, we share a lot on our podcast and we are being vulnerable, but then there's a different depth that maybe you go with with your husband or with your best friend and things like that. And I think it's learning. I don't know, for me, like you said, it takes courage for me to not be perfect. And it also builds that connection. Like we've built such a connection off being vulnerable because we are able to truly be who we are because we accept each other for who we are, which I feel like that was so many things in one. But like, it's hard to be vulnerable if you don't feel you're going to be accepted. And if you're not going to be accepted, You're going to put a front on. And I think that's something with our friendship we've really found is that we're vulnerable because we know we're accepted. And we know that we both accept each other no matter what happens. And I think that takes a while. Like that just doesn't happen with anybody. And I think that's why I think there's two different ways. If you're sharing your life on social media, you're going to be vulnerable in one way. But then with friendships and relationships, it's a different kind of vulnerability.
I think like also vulnerability kind of bouncing off of that is kind of like in a form of, this sounds like kind of weird, but being naked, because not everybody feels confident being naked, but not everyone's also used to it. And so you're literally shedding off these layers that protect you and you're showing your raw self. It's essentially, it's the essence of exposing the raw human spirit, in my opinion, when you're vulnerable. And when you don't have those layers to kind of protect you, it's scary. And like you said, it was scary. And if you don't have the right environment to do that in, it could be used against you. And that's when it can turn toxic. And that's not healthy for anyone in that aspect. But you have to make sure that the areas you're being vulnerable in are the right moments for you and for the other person. Because if the other person isn't going to receive whatever you're being vulnerable about well, then that's only going to make you feel more insecure or, shut down completely. And that's not good. And like for us, I mean, we're still trying to figure out the vulnerability aspect because like, I mean, freak, what was it? Like a week ago, I had a really hard time opening up with you about like certain things. I was really overwhelmed. And then like there was like this weird like distance for us for a few days. And then and Bryce was
If
like,
you
you
know
just
us,
gotta
we talk
open up.
like 10 times a day. That when I mean
Literally
distance,
like
we didn't
sun
talk
up
for
to
like
sundown.
we were
And
on
then
the phone.
some.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
All the time. No, you're good. Yeah, we literally talk all the time. And so it's just how it is. We're so used to talking. And then all of a sudden, like I was getting in my head, I was freaking out about work stuff and then personal life. And there's just a lot of layers that were kind of being affected. And Bryce's like, you just need to talk to her, just be open and honest. And I'm like, yeah, but this isn't her problem. Like, that's not fair for me to put that on her when it has nothing really to do with her. It's my own insecurities. He goes, but she's your friend and she'll support you in that. And I've never really been able to express such a depth, like a deep vulnerability with people before without it being perceived as, oh, you're fine, or that's not a big deal. And that was hard. And so finally I called you and I was like, and I just burst into tears. I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I can't believe it. But you were so accepting of that. And it's a new thing for me because I haven't ever, other than like Bryce and family, I think really have been able to authentically be vulnerable and show you that I'm not always a strong person. I'm not always this happy, ready and ambitious person. Like I have these moments where I'm kind of like, oh crap, what am I doing? Like, and that's hard to show people, especially when you do have such a dominant, strong personality.
Totally. I love that you're able to be open with me. And I think something that's really, like you said, we're still working on it. And there's so many layers to that. There's been so much that we talk all the time. We ask each other questions. We try and really understand each other. And I think that call, like every time you're open, you learn something new. And I was going to say that call, we took a bigger step in our friendship because yeah, it was hard. And, there's scary things sometimes being open, but seeing how somebody accepts something and seeing how your friendship really is can add to those layers. And I think that's something that's been so interesting to me lately because how accepting you've been and how open you've been and how much you've even pushed me. I feel like I'm able to be vulnerable in a different way on podcasts like this and not feel like everything always has to be perfect. And it's really interesting because I was saying this earlier, but like how we're vulnerable together is very different than how we are, of course, on our podcast or on social media. But we are able to be vulnerable in those situations also in one way. But that's because we have our support of each other and we realize, I think for me, what I really realized is that I don't want people in my life that aren't going to accept me for who I am. And I think that's what you really showed me is that you're going to accept me no matter what. And that's, I think, something like after the call, I was like, are you feeling better? You're like, yeah, because you accepted me for who I was and you were there for me. And that's something that I think you kind of have. I think, I don't know, I had a really hard time finding people like that. Like, yes, I have Evan and yes, I have my parents, but that's so different than finding a friend that, is there for you when and asks you those questions and understands when you can't hold it together and when you can't be strong, because we all want to be strong and we all want to put on, but that's just not how it is. We all have hard days. We all have days that, not everything goes as planned. And it's nice to have somebody that isn't your significant other and isn't your parents that you can call. And I don't know, for me, I'm going to use girl talk with, be like, it's different talking to you than it is talking to Evan or talking to my parents. And I think that's what's so
Absolutely.
cool and what's added to both. I don't know, you can tell me what you think, but I think that's what's added to our ability to be vulnerable in multiple different situations and especially in our friendship.
You nailed that on the head. Like literally the vulnerability levels that people bring to different type of relationships and dynamics, like you said, girl talk, like that's so different. Like having that perspective that sometimes isn't, I don't know, I feel like the family and the relationships of inside, like, a spouse or a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, those are in a bubble, I feel. And so when you're not a part of that close bubble and you're like maybe that friend, it helps you see this wider perspective and also helps you kind of think beyond yourself too when other people are vulnerable. Because you, I think like there's just such a persona that we have to be strong all the time and we're not allowed to struggle. And I think that's why vulnerability is so scary, is because we don't want other people to
People to know
assume
our weak.
that, yeah, our
I feel like
weaknesses,
people
and then
know
they
our
use them against
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just hard because it's like, well, I don't want someone to understand that I'm going through this and then be like, oh, well, I'm going to do this to make sure that, she doesn't keep, thinking I'm going to be better or whatever. I don't know. People like use it as a competition, and it's not good. And so you have to be very careful about how you approach it, because then, for example, with me and you, we can help see it from different perspectives that maybe, I don't know, your relationship with Evan or your mom and dad, that wouldn't bring it. I don't know, because their personality types are just also different, which isn't bad. It's just, it's good. Everyone brings a different perspective, but you have to be careful about how you approach it, because otherwise it's just, they're not going to understand.
Totally. I think it also really comes to taking the time to get to know somebody. Like, I think a lot of times you think with a friendship, oh, you're just supposed to be vulnerable. Oh, you're supposed to just know them. Like, once you're close with somebody. But do you really know the person? Have you taken the time to understand them, to peel back those layers, to be there for them? Because I definitely have not always been great at being super vulnerable around friends, just because I have, like gone through different things. But I now am able to call you when I'm having a hard time, because you've time after time showed me, hey, I'm here for you. Hey, are you having a hard time today? Because I think you are, because you're paying attention to the things that maybe I'm not going to be honest about, because I'm trying to be strong and I'm trying to make sure I'm not showing that it's hard for me. And I think we all go through things in life that we need to be, I don't know, but I'm trying to explain this the right way. You need to be strong, but sometimes it's nice to have somebody you can show, hey, I'm not actually strong right now, but can you help me continue to be strong
Mm-hmm.
in this situation? And I think knowing I can call you on those days where it's like, this is really hard. And it just is showing me how much more I don't really care to be perfect. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
feel like I need to always be perfect, because it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be vulnerable. But I think for so
Mm-hmm.
long I thought, which is funny because my parents are so open and we're so open, but I felt like outside of my close circle or even to any friends that I couldn't be vulnerable. And I don't know. I feel like I just thought, oh, I'm supposed to be perfect outside of my core, like family and significant other.
So when you say that you think that people are probably, scared of not being accepted, or, that inner circle or whatever it is, I mean, whoever, why do you think people are so quick to judge and not accept people when they are going through hard times? Like, why is that society's default to automatically put that maybe their own insecurities on someone else?
I think a lot of times it's people's own insecurities. And that's something I think you really have to work on within yourself and realize, just because something might be a trigger to you. I think that, let me try and sum this up the right way. I'm thinking as I'm talking, but I feel like a lot of people have insecurities and they have triggers to those insecurities. So if somebody's having a hard time, they're not always able to be there for that person and let that person be vulnerable, because immediately they put up their wall because they're already struggling with something and they don't know how to be there for somebody. And I think that's something you have to work really hard to get to a point where you can be happy for others or be there for others, whatever it might be, to allow them to be vulnerable, to be open, and to not judge them. And I don't think that's easy at all. And I think that's something that you really have to work within yourself to be able to be like, this is my thing, not theirs. I think that's something for us that has really been something I've learned is, okay, just because I have insecurities or because I'm struggling with something doesn't mean I don't want to be there for somebody else. And how can I disconnect those two?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not always easy, but I think finding somebody in your close circle that you can talk to about it and be like, hey, you know what? I'm feeling insecure about this. How can I
Mm-hmm.
work through this? How can I be there for somebody else? How can I be supportive? For so long, I didn't want to admit that I had insecurities and I was struggling with things. So then I just was this constant wall. So when somebody was going to be vulnerable with me or be open with me, I don't know if I was really able to be there exactly how I'd hoped to be because those insecurities and those things were so quick to come up. And that's why I think a lot of people, at least when we've talked and different people I've talked to, a lot of it comes from people not knowing how to be there for somebody else because they have their own insecurities and they're dealing with their own struggles. And it's so hard for people to be happy for other people. And I don't know why that is. And that's something I think I've actually, since we become friends, have really worked on. And something that you've really inspired me to be even more like supportive and happy for my friends because I've realized just I want my friends to succeed and be happy and be able to come to me in these hard moments when you need me. And, but how do you create that space?
I think in order to create that space, this might be a question and an answer, but I think it honestly can start in the home because I think that if your environment that you're growing up in, you aren't like showing, I don't want to say weakness, but showing vulnerability, I guess is what it could be. Showing that you're not always strong is a normal thing and it's okay to feel. It
I
can
like
help
that
a
a lot.
child. Yeah, yeah, helping a child understand that okay, I'm having a hard day and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to work through these emotions and I think accepting those realities at from a young age can help them and it's a generational thing because you look at how like grandparents, they went through, wars and like the Great Depression and such a hard time. So their hard is different than what we would be probably considered hard today. And that it's just like you can't look at them eye to eye, but you can teach them how to accept those feelings and accept them and that just because something that maybe they're having a difficult time with or an insecurity or it's something that they really I think even vulnerability can be not just insecurities, it can be something you're really passionate about but you're scared to talk about it because people will make fun of it. For the
Definitely.
longest time, yeah, for the longest time I had that and it's hard to kind of shed those layers because you fear that rejection or the misunderstandings that can come from that. But when we open our hearts and our minds to accepting that this is someone's life and just because they had it differently than what maybe another person had doesn't mean that we can't love them and allow them to feel these feelings because if we just brush them off then how are they supposed to process those feelings and emotions?
I really like how you said that because I think sometimes when people are having a hard time, and you go to somebody, they relate it to their hard time, and that's not what you're supposed to do. When somebody comes to you, yeah, I get it. Maybe you've had a harder time, and yeah, maybe something's bigger than that. But in that moment, to that person, that's a big deal, and that's something that I've learned over time. And that I remember saying this to my mom when I was younger. I think I had a boyfriend. I was young, and it was some big thing happened, and she was like, "It's really not that big a deal right now." And I was like, "But to me, right this moment, it's a big deal. Maybe in the future, it's not going to be a big deal, but right now," and she was like, "You're right. I understand what you're saying. Like, how can I support you?" And I remember saying that, and that's in any situation. I feel for so long in my life, it was, I would have, people would either not ask if I was having a hard time because they thought everything was perfect, or they'd be like, "Oh, what I'm going through is worse." And that was one of the main reasons I think I stopped being vulnerable with most people because how are you going to be vulnerable when you're sitting there and they're like, "That's not a big deal," and you're like, "Oh, it's not." Like, you start to
Exactly.
question why you're having these feelings. And that's something in our friendship that you've always been very there for me. And you said something about starting it from a family and when you're young, and my parents have always been very open and like that. And I think another layer to that is being with a significant other that is also there to support you. And that's something Evan showed me. It wasn't, I think in your family it was one thing, but to have somebody outside of my family love me and show me like your feelings matter. And I remember him like from the very beginning, I had this pressure that our relationship had to be perfect. I don't even know what that means. But I remember that. And he's like, "Bailey, no relationship's ever going to be perfect, but how can we work on it? How can I support you? How can we push each other?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, you're right." And then when we became friends, I knew more of how to do that because I've already gone through it with Evan. And yeah, we're always still working on it, but I had seen him show me how to do it. So then I was able to walk into our friendship with a different perspective of how to be there for you and how to allow you to be vulnerable and how to accept you in maybe different ways.
I love that. Oftentimes with relationships there can be a whole different aspect to vulnerability and like you experienced some in ways that probably weren't healthy. And then someone was able to show you in a whole new area how it can be, and you can be accepted, and it can be transforming. And I think that you also, I mean, I try to think about like the situations of like being married for me. It comes with a lot of vulnerability. So kind of like with the whole marriage thing, the reason I'm like trying to like figure out how to formulate my words is just putting things bluntly. So, I mean, I was a virgin until I got married. I mean, and so I don't share that with everybody because it comes with judgment.
Till
People are
now.
like, yeah, literally. I'm like, so I mean, but I've accepted that if people judge me for that, then that's fine. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm confident
What
in
do you
myself
think
about it.
I guess, sorry, not to interrupt you. And I think
No,
this
you're
is such
good.
an interesting thing because I know it's taken you a long time to get to this point. And I knew behind the scenes, but that's not, we had talked a lot about it to get to this point for you to share it on a
Yeah.
podcast. And what do you think brought you to the point to be confident enough to be able to mention that in a podcast and to get it out there?
Honestly, I don't know. I think I'm just like becoming more confident in myself and my path and realizing that I don't have to follow what everyone else deems is the way you live. And I think that that's what's made me different is that I haven't lived this normal life. And I don't care if people are virgins or not virgins. I really, I do not think about it at all. If they're not great, if you are, like, I don't care. Like, that's not what people make it such a big deal. And I'm like, okay. But for me, it's just that that was something I didn't have really I didn't really think about too much growing up. I mean, I knew that like I mean, I was raised pretty Christian, and so that was just something we did. But I mean, that was also my own thing I did for myself. I just never thought of it. And so I think how I kind of came to the terms of becoming confident is just I became confident in myself, and then but when I got married, I mean, it was a whole new level of being vulnerable, and so I was like almost like it was like a 180, and I was like, how am I supposed to just all of a sudden allow myself to just be this way in a marriage? How am I supposed to allow myself to be intimate? It came with so many things, and it took years. And I think it's always something I'm always working on still because it's not you're learning so much at all times, and vulnerability can come in so many different shapes and forms that you don't even realize it until you're presented the opportunity and you're like, oh my gosh, like
Definitely.
that's kind of like what I was saying earlier. I said when you're naked you literally have clothes on, and when like here you are, it can be a metaphor and literal, but I'm just like, I'm not saying this to like make you cringe or anything, but that's just how it is.
No,
Like
but there's other
it,
people that are, I'm sure, have been in the same shoes. So this is going to be relatable to them because
yes,
maybe it's something that's not talked about that much. And maybe that's something, you being able to be vulnerable is going to help somebody else. And that's what I love so much about our podcast. Now that we are pushing ourselves to be more vulnerable, we don't, like these podcasts are going to help somebody else because we're sharing experiences that maybe aren't as talked about.
yeah, but then like you also look at it from the opposite perspective of people who maybe aren't virgins, and maybe they're confident in that, and they still don't like always feel good about the situation, or people who feel guilty about not being a virgin and they were wanting to be. I mean, I see it all the time, and people judge them regardless if they are or aren't. And so it's like, well,
You're going
why
to be
are we
judged no matter
putting
what.
yeah, exactly. You're going to be judged no matter what. You can't. You're not. I mean, I used to say you're not Nutella. You can't make everyone happy. But I just learned that not everyone likes Nutella. So I mean, it's still like, but it's just one of those things that you just can't. You have to remember, yes, people are going to judge you, and that sucks, and shame on them for judging you for how you live your life. But like for me and you, if people came to us and was like, you know what, I relate to that, I'm not a virgin, but you know what, I don't care, and I'm here, like, thank you for making me feel confident and accepted and loved. And that is where change happens. That's where we come in. That's where vulnerability can become such an I think it's really undervalued right now, and it's such a strong, I don't know, movement, I want to say. And it can really transform someone's life. And then if whether there's someone's confident or not in whatever it may be, I don't know, whether if it's vulnerable in the home, in marriage, in a career, it doesn't matter. Like it starts with accepting people and coming to them and loving them. And that's what we talk about here is no matter what someone says or does, I mean, variable, obviously. I mean, but like obviously, like you just have, I think it starts with love and acceptance, and it's such a simple concept, but people make it so complicated.
I agree. And when you haven't been accepted by different people, you maybe aren't completely accepting of yourself, or maybe you don't really know who you are. Like, I feel like I am learning myself so much these last few years. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm getting
Mhm.
older and yeah, there's different things, but I'm also not just sitting here and saying, okay, this is who I am. I go to therapy. I, like open up with you. I do different things. I take time for myself. I'm working on myself. I'm pushing myself to grow. I'm doing all these things to accept and love myself and really find who I am. And having people around me that I really want in my life is a huge part of that. And it's a huge help in me pushing myself to do these things, because when things are hard, it's not easy to go and do. Like, that's just when it's scary, when it's something you don't always do. It's so nice when you have people around you that are supporting you. And I think a lot of people are missing that. Like, at least when we met, it was like, yeah, we both had other friends, and yeah, we've had other, good relationships with friends, but how do you build super deep relationships with certain friends? And that's not going to be everyone. And we talk about that in our friends podcast, is not everyone's meant to be your best friend, but how can you find people that you really want around you, that are supporting you and pushing you and helping you become the best version of yourself? Because I spent so long in college surrounding myself with people that I would never want to be like. And then I look back and I'm like, thank goodness I walked away from that. And thank goodness I
Peace,
decided to take
suckers.
time. Yeah. But like, take time and step back, and it's not easy. I think I spent almost a year. I didn't let, maybe longer. I didn't let anybody in. Like, I knew I wasn't ready to let anybody in. I knew I had to work on myself, and I knew that was going to take time. And yeah, I'm always still working on myself, but I had to get to a certain spot to let people in. And it's just so interesting to see how much we are both, growing, just doing a podcast like this, like how vulnerable we're being and how open we're being. And we want to create a community where people can come and listen and ask us questions and talk to us and feel heard, because so many things aren't talked about, and maybe they're little things. And I think the little things add up to big things. So all these little things are going to add up. And it's, just like this one podcast is about vulnerability, but that's just a little part to a bigger picture of who we are.
Yeah, it really is. There's like we've been saying, there's layers to it, and I think that the more we talk, the more we open up, like you've been saying, is the more that it will build that relationship with people to be able to come and talk. Because I mean, you said, how can we find people who are willing to listen, to be our friend, to accept us for being vulnerable and not judge us? And it's hard. Like, I do not put myself out there. I mean, I really could more. I could probably try to make more friends than I do now, but it's terrifying because that rejection. And on top of that, finding someone that you connect with on a level that I don't like comparing it to our friendship because it's so different. Like I think it's there's you can have tons of friends without being like soul sisters essentially, but like you really can. It's just it but you have to put yourself out there. And that's what you did. I mean, you messaged me on Instagram. I never, ever would have done what you did. And it's just crazy that one message can change everything.
It really
And I mean, it
can. You
wasn't like
never
you were
know.
just like, hey, let's be friends, let's work together. No, like it took months. And even then, it was still like, it wasn't
And I
until
don't
we
know
really
what
about,
pushed me to do that. It's so weird.
I
That's a
know.
whole different story in itself. Something was telling me to reach out to you.
Yeah, it's just crazy how those little things can work out. And I mean, like we've said, we've grown up being told not to talk to strangers on the internet. So I'm not saying go and message the next person you see on Instagram and say, "Hey, we want to work together." Like, no, but like it's just I think that's what Unleashed is turning into, is a foundation for people to connect and find what maybe we found, and we can help other people do that through our community. Because I think as people kind of come in and out, you'll find that this is a community where people strive and want those things. And even if they don't, that's okay. You don't have to want friends or someone around. If you're content with yourself, then that's great. But this is a safe place.
Definitely. And, I think something we would love to talk about is how we're pushing ourselves, because maybe it's going to help somebody else push themselves. 'Cause I don't think it's you always know you have to push yourself. I don't think you always
No.
realize how much we have to grow. And I literally yesterday I was talking to my parents and we were talking about growing and I was like, I love pushing myself to grow, but it's a lot of work. Like it's a lot. Honestly, I think it's a lot easier for most people just to sit back and say this is my life. But how can we, challenge our community to push themselves? How can we be more supportive? How can we be there to create this community that people feel heard and feel like they can come to us and find what they're looking for, what maybe is missing in their life?
The first step is to figure out where you are and not lie to yourself. I was asking you, do you catch yourself like lying to yourself? I mean, trying to convince yourself of a reality that you're maybe denying. And I mean, you could really go into that. Well, what if I want that reality to be my life? There's a difference between like manifesting it and trying to like live this life that like you want. But then there's also like, are you denying yourself of the help that you might be needing? And you say you're fine? There's like that opposite yin and yang thing to it. I think that when you figure out where you're at in life, that can determine the next step. And for me, I just felt stagnant. I felt like I wasn't progressing as a human. I wasn't contributing to a greater good, I guess. I felt like I was just kind of marinating in my problems. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you don't have to have problems necessarily, but like I don't know. I feel like as human beings, we're always not working, but like striving for the next thing in life. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but you also have to realize where are you emotionally in that. And if you're able to kind of peel those layers back and figure out, okay, what I mean, or work backwards. What is your end goal? End goal, I say with air quotes. But like, if you want happiness or a friendship or whatever, you kind of have to work backwards. But you can't have a friend without being taking care of yourself, because you won't be able to contribute to that friendship in the ways that you probably should if you aren't feeling good about yourself. So you have to work on yourself. So I mean, coming full circle now on this, what would you think is the first thing that they do to push themselves? Because I mean, taking that first step is the hardest part.
Like push themselves to like find themselves or like to want to work on themselves. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, like how do you motivate someone to work on themselves? Like how do they get like for me, I mean, I guess it was I mean, you really helped amp that up, but so did Bryce for me. But I mean, I don't for someone who doesn't necessarily have that person in their life, how do they get themselves out of bed?
I think something that can really help, and especially if you don't have somebody that's going to push you and somebody that's going to be that person to push you, as is, and this sounds so simple, but I think it's taking time for yourself and doing something for yourself. If it's going out and sitting in silence for an hour and being like, just think, let yourself be in your thoughts, write down your goals, write down your thoughts, write things down, think about it. I think a lot of times we are all so busy that we push those thoughts down and we push those things we know we need to work on away. But when you take that time to really connect with yourself and figure out what you want, that is going to be the start of taking those steps forward. And I do that all the time. Like, I feel like this trip I've been on has been, we're out at like we're really camping and it's a lot more mellow, and I've done it before, but I try and do it whenever I feel like maybe I'm in a spot where it's like I need to reconnect, need to rethink, and I literally, no music, just go sit, hang outside with Hudson and think and write down these thoughts that I have. And that might sound so simple, but I think a lot of times we really are, like, I find myself, I'm so busy and I find so many excuses on why I can't take time for myself, because I don't want to think about that bigger picture, that end goal, whatever we want to call it, because that's scary and there's a lot that comes from it and it's not just going to happen tomorrow. But how can you take that like hour of you going and you taking time for yourself to start taking those baby steps to reaching those goals? What are your goals? Because your goals can change. And what does that look like? And I don't think it needs to be what are your goals and exactly how is it going to happen, but just what is your big in the next few years? What do you want the next few years to look like? And how can you slowly start to make that happen? And I think taking that time can make such a difference. And I like journaling, writing it down. It sounds so little, but it's something I've even recently reminded myself that it's so important.
Mm-hmm. Everything you just said, first of all, I loved, but like there was like you said, about taking time for yourself and to really ensure that you are doing things that you enjoy and really figuring out who you are. And that can come in so many different shapes and, looks. I mean, there's so many different, I mean, what I would say, you said hanging out with Hudson and really taking that time, I mean, off the phone
Yeah,
and
it
being
can look
present.
so
That is,
different. Yeah.
yes. But like something I tried to do this morning was when I wake up, I usually just I don't like get on my phone, check Instagram, and the usual. I mean, I'll lay in bed for a half hour extra after I wake up, and then I'll get my day going. I'll get up, but this past week has been really different for me. I've been really trying to figure out what my goals are, and that thanks to you. I keep wanting to figure that out, and it's just like I'm like it'll come to me, and I'm like it's not going to come to me if I'm not like putting in more effort. So I've been really trying to like dig deeper into what my long-term goals are, and I don't know what that looks like. I mean, even from when I was younger, I always said I didn't have like a dream job, but I think I kind of did, but I dismissed it because I didn't think it was realistic. But I mean, even then, I was always kind of like, not really. Like, it wasn't anything I was like dead set on. And I think that that's kind of still applicable today because I don't know what my long term goals look like. I'm only just starting to now figure that out. And going back to what I was saying about this morning, though, I just took time. I played with Olive. I put my phone off to the side. I was reading a book. I can tell you how many times, maybe on two hands, how many I've intentionally read a book, and that's including for school. I'm not a huge reader unless it's about nonfiction. Now, if nonfiction, that does not count. I love reading nonfiction. I love learning, but being able to kind of detach from the world really can help you reset your goals and figure out what you truly like and want in life. And for me, I realize that a lot of it doesn't actually stem back to a career choice. And I think that, like, there's a show, Emily in Paris. There's a scene in it where Luke is talking to Emily about how people will work, that French people work to live, but Americans live to work. And I think that has like hit me in my head, and I think of that all the time. And I'm like, yes, work is necessary for living. Yes, we have dreams and passions, and there's nothing wrong with following that. But at the end of the day, is that making you happy? And I mean, whatever your priorities are, fine. But for me, I've been sort of lost, and so being able to take that time and step back and figure out what those goals are by taking time off my phone, because when you're staring at something for so long, it starts to look weird, and you overthink it, and then it just kind of downward spirals. And then the other day, I woke up and it just was like bam, and it was like it wasn't even like, it was just weird. Like, it was just like this idea popped in my head, and I'm like, what the heck? So I texted you, and I was like, I know what I'm doing, kind of, sort of. Don't spook me. I'll overthink it. So it's just like one of those things that I'm like, oh, this is starting to make sense. And then it was just having that time away, when you take a step back, when you're not so close to the picture, you can see the full picture. I mean, that's, I think, in essence too, what life can really do to help you push yourself. So then you can be
Definitely.
vulnerable. And I mean, it really is a ripple effect.
It
It
is.
affects each other. Yeah.
And I love that you shared what you did. If you follow my Instagram, I've been sharing a self-growth journey. And yesterday my post was about pushing yourself to take time for yourself. And what does that look like? And I love that you shared that, because it was so interesting just reading a few off like the top. But everyone does it so differently. Like, someone was like, take myself on a date. And, someone said gardening. Someone else said a picnic. Someone else said they opened the blinds in the morning to let the sunlight in, grabbed a warm lemon water. And it's just so, like, there's more, but those are just a few. And it's so cool to hear, just because taking time for yourself might look one way in your head, everybody does it so differently. And that was something that really pushed me to want to share that, because I was like, what do you do? Maybe you're going to inspire somebody's idea. Like you said this morning, you played with Olive, and I think you shared on your story you meditated. Is that right? I think I saw something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. Bryce and I, he's like, so like, what are you doing to me? I'm like, hold still. I'm going to put these pressure points on your neck. And he's like, you're going to kill me. Yeah, I'm really huge into meditation, but he's like, really, what are you doing?
That's what's so cool about it, though, because it looks so different. Like, when you were talking about that, it like reminded me about my post yesterday, and like I was going through them, and I keep seeing people add them in throughout the day of different things they're trying, and it's so cool to see what that looks like, because that's going to give somebody else an idea to push themselves to do something. And I think sometimes we look at things of how to be vulnerable and how to grow and all these things, and that's something that really inspired me on my self-growth journey, and sharing more about it was that, yeah, there are big things that I push myself to do and scare me and I want to share, but what are those little things also? Like the little things could be going down to the beach with Hudson and playing, but having our morning, like you said, meditating, or me having my morning cup of coffee, and maybe I stop having my morning cup of coffee and working, and I sit there and I enjoy the morning. Just doing little things in your day. How can you start to add time for yourself in, even if it's 10 minutes a day, because those little things are going to add up to make you feel like you can be vulnerable and you can share, or even not be vulnerable and see what you want to do and what that journey looks like for you.
It's kind of like baking a cake. When you look at the cake itself, it's this beautiful frosting. I mean, whatever cake you like, strawberry shortcake, whatever cheese, just pick one. I mean, you look at it and it's like, yeah, it's delicious chocolate. It's chocolate cake for days. But it's not like it's just all of a sudden came out on the counter. No, you had to add sugar and flour and baking soda and eggs, and I mean, depending on, I mean, if you're gluten free, obviously, then that's like a little different. But we get the point.
We got the. Me and Haley, when we go to like make sure we cover all the bases, we're like, wait, we really didn't need to cover all those bases.
But I say that because it's funny.
If you're vegan,
like, oh wait, if you're vegan, yes, no egg. But that's what I'm just saying though. Like there's different ingredients, and you have to add them to the bowl. And if one is left out,
depending on how you're doing
exactly how whatever cake you want to make. And I think that when you look at that, you're like, oh yeah, okay. So when I'm building my life cake, I need a little bit of time, a date with myself. I need time to relax in the morning. I need to enjoy my job, or to watch that movie I'm wanting to watch, or I have to pay these bills. I mean, there are life things, there are things you love, and then there's things you have to do as in order to survive. I mean, there's a bunch of layers to it, but at the end of the day, like, what does your cake look like? What do you want it to be? And that starts now. Being vulnerable, allowing yourself to feel these things. I mean, all of those are ingredients to baking our own cake. And now I really want cake now that we've talked about this.
And we're back on the food talk. I'm just kidding. That was actually a really good reference.
Analogy.
Yeah, they're analogy things. That's the right word we're looking for there.
I always my dad grew up using analogies, and so I can like whip them up like that. They're so easy. I love it. I don't know why. But
no, it's so cool though to talk about this and see where we're both, how we're both pushing ourselves to be vulnerable and how it's pushing us to grow, and just all the layers, because there's so many layers to this conversation.
With vulnerability, I was thinking about, so the fear of vulnerability is being rejected, judged, misunderstood, right? Which is hard. That's really hard. I've experienced it. I mean, we were asking each other questions the other night. What was the one thing you look for in a friendship, in friendships? Like, what's the first quality? And I believe you said, what was it? No judgment. I want to say it was like something along the lines of no judgment. Oh man, it'll come to me. And I said acceptance. And I mean, that you don't have to agree with my vulnerabilities. You don't have to like them or approve of them or whatever. But as a human being, you need to accept that is my reality. That is my life. And you can ask that for yourself. And I think that when you look at it coming full perspective on it, when someone doesn't accept that out of you, okay, yeah, that sucks. And allowing yourself, okay, dang it. But what's the worst case scenario out of that if you don't let it escape you? If you don't let it, there's a point of accepting the emotion, processing it, but then not letting it control you, where you still can be vulnerable, even if people don't get you, even if they don't accept you. I think at that point, then when you've accepted the emotion, allowed yourself to feel it, not dismissing it, but then using that and putting it into action still, that's building confidence. Definitely. Because you put yourself out there and you tried. And if you thought that they would accept that, or you thought being vulnerable, I mean, in any aspect, whether if it's giving a speech, that can be vulnerable. It doesn't even involve another person. But that you're building confidence and you're working towards a better person. You're working towards being a better, version of yourself. And that is amazing to me. And so, I mean, how can people shift the perspective in their minds where, okay, yeah, someone didn't accept that, but how can they still become confident even if someone didn't agree?
I think something that's really helped me is realizing that I'm not going to change for anybody. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
I if you know you're being a good person and you know what you're doing makes you happy and you like being vulnerable and you know that takes that wall down and that creates those really good relationships around you, the people that don't accept you, maybe those aren't the people that want, maybe they're not meant to be in your life, but maybe they're gonna be in your life, and maybe they're people that you keep at a little bit more of a distance. Maybe they don't know as
Healthy
much about you.
boundary.
Maybe, yeah, maybe those aren't the people that you're super vulnerable with, but you can still be vulnerable, you can still be yourself. And
Absolutely.
I think something for me that I realized is that I no longer expect that person to be what I thought that I needed from them, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
instead
holding them
of,
to an
you start to
expectation.
yeah, you start to realize, okay, I can be vulnerable. I can be myself around that person. Maybe that person wants me to be somebody I'm not, but I'm not going to be that. And that's okay that they're not going to love that exactly. They want me to change. They want me to do this. I'm not going to. That's closure for me. And that I don't need anything more from that. I'm going to keep that person with a boundary, and maybe it's a more surface level friendship where then you have other friendships and other people that are going to accept you exactly for who you are. And I don't think you have to lose your vulnerability or who you are around the person that doesn't accept you. I think you just can not hold them to as high of a standard of what you think they should or how they're going to react.
Yeah, and when you do that, I think that not only will it provide you the peace that you might need when you let go of the expectations that you hold in your mind about them, it'll allow you to grow in that relationship too because you constantly won't be getting disappointed or hurt. I think that we all have these expectations, I think, from certain people. And obviously, you can't avoid getting disappointed by people. It just happens. But learning how to control what you can control is the first step into figuring out how you can progress as yourself. I mean, in the last episode we talked about traveling, and this is a life lesson. When you lower your expectations going
I was
somewhere
just thinking
new,
that.
yeah, you're setting yourself up for a more successful trip. And that can be used in life. And I'm not saying lower your expectations or standards. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that there's a balance with it. You don't want to put your own expectations on someone because then that's not that's good for them. And I mean, is you're just holding them to being accountable to something you can't expect a fish to climb a tree. That's a famous quote I've seen, and that's what you do. You just got to make sure that that fish is not being expected to climb that tree because it ain't gonna happen.
Definitely. And I think that's something I've just learned so much of is that I've gotten closure from friends or past relationships or whatever it is by realizing that's not what I needed in my life and that I still want to be who I am. And maybe I am going to still have them in my life, just not in the way that I thought I was going to. And I think sometimes we get so stuck on the idea of what we thought it was going to look like, but it's not that. And a lot of times it's actually maybe this is, I think it's usually for me at least, it's somebody that doesn't want to work on themselves and isn't growing because I think you see a lot more reaction and a lot more like hand up, doesn't really want you to be vulnerable, and just like a lot more to it, like layers. I don't know if that's the right way to explain it, but for me, I've realized that I want people I can talk to and like open up with and be deep with, but I've also realized that's not going to be every friendship, and to see that I get different things from different friendships and to not hold everyone to that expectation.
I love that. Vulnerability is just brutal in general, and but I don't think it has to be. And I think that that's the perspective and the shift we want to change in people's minds, that it can be scary, but when you build that confidence that we've been talking about, when you change those expectations, it really transforms you. And it's not easy, and it's going to be a process you work on probably your entire life. There's going to be moments that you didn't even realize you had to be vulnerable in, and that is hard. And you know what? That's okay. And you have to realize it's okay. Being vulnerable is not a weakness. And society makes it sound like it is. It's not. You do not have to be strong all the time because they say that this is like toxic positivity or whatever, or toxic, I don't know, gaslighting. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But like, you can't enjoy the good without the bad. But You really can't. And I'm not saying that that doesn't make it hard, but there are things that come from it that you learn. And
How
people
can you
wouldn't be
grow from it?
those. Yeah, and that's the thing. You have to just, I mean, ugh, it sucks. And you know what? There are days I've cried and it's just been awful and I'm just like, why do I feel like this? But then I look on those good days and I'm like, why can't I always feel like this? And it's just like, okay, well, how can I help myself in those moments? And you have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to do the work. And it's not easy and it takes time. And I think as you begin to do that, you'll be able to figure out how strong of a person you really are.
I love how you said that. And something we really wanted to start doing at the end of our podcast was asking our audience how they can unleash yourself. And I think that's a really fun one for this. So, however you take that, ask yourself, how can you be vulnerable? How can you unleash yourself to be vulnerable? It's such a great way to start taking those steps and really finding who you are and growing every day in a different way.
Ask yourself and feel free to share your stories with us about how you can unleash yourself.
Thanks for watching.